Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you again for joining the Laurier Milton Lecture Series, and welcome to our February lecture. This series runs the second Wednesday of the month from October to May at 7 p.m. So welcome or welcome back. We are so glad to have you this evening. My name is Carolyn, and I work for Wilfrid Laurier University. We are so proud to be partners with the Milton Public Library on this incredible series. Just some housekeeping before we get started. You all have been muted on entry with your videos turned off, and we do have some time carved out for questions. So if you have them, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom right corner of your screens. This lecture is being recorded, and it'll be shared via email to you by the library in the near future. Before we begin the program this evening, we would like to acknowledge that Wilfrid Laurier University and its campuses are located on the shared traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We recognize, honor, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and water on which Laurier is now present. But perhaps you're joining us from another location this evening. And if that's the case, I would encourage you to take a moment to reflect and acknowledge the traditional territories on which you reside. Acknowledging this reminds us of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work. I'm so excited to introduce tonight's topic and speaker, African Canadian Girls in Activism in Ontario with Esther Hayford, PhD candidate in the Faculty of Social Work at Wilfrid Laurier University. Esther qualified as a lawyer in Ghana in 1993 and holds an LLM from Queen's University and an MA in Development Studies from York University. Esther enjoys working in the community and has worked with community and government agencies, post-secondary institutions, and private law firms. Some of the institutions and agencies she's worked with include the AIDS Alert Ghana, Ghana Law Reform Commission, Faculty of Law with the University of Ghana, and the African and Caribbean Council on HIV/AIDS in Ontario. Her current research focuses on African girls and activism in high schools in Ontario. I am so excited to hear from Esther, and I'm so thankful for her time this evening. Esther, thank you, and the screen or floor is yours.
Thank you, Caroline. Hello, everyone. I'm grateful that you decided to spend your evening with me to learn more about African Canadian girls and activism in Ontario high schools. Let me begin by thanking the organizers of this event, Wilfrid Laurier University and Milton Public Library for this event. I'm also grateful to Professors Anne-Carrie Stevens and Edward Shiza, my co-advisors, and committee members, Drs. Leah Karagata and Uzo Anucha, for their unwavering support. I dare say the most important group of people this evening are my participants. My story is incomplete without them. Once again, I thank you for spending an hour of your time this evening with me. So my goal is to share aspects of my dissertation with you. Please note that my dissertation is evolving and I'm almost done transcribing, so there's a limit to how much I can share with you today. Before I delve into this study, I'd like to provide an overview. Let me share my screen. I forgot to do that. So share my screen. Okay. So before I delve into this study, I'd like to provide an overview of what I'll be highlighting this evening. I'll talk about my social location, and then I will to give an indication of what brought me to this topic. And then I will provide some background information to provide context for student resistance. After that, I will provide more details about the study. And of course, there'll be time for feedback. So while I was selecting this topic, I had several questions from other people who were also interested in the topic. And one of the questions that came up was, are we placing additional burdens on Black girls with the expectation on them to persevere through unequal circumstances rather than on societal structures to change these circumstances? The discussion about the merits and demerits of student resistance is for another day. But I would say that student activism is another way to keep people in authority accountable. Dr. Day, a researcher who has written extensively about student experience, the schooling experiences of Black students in Canada, has a quote that says, the quote provides a rationale for the continued struggle by the Black community for access to education that is equitable for marginalized youth. So the quote is, resisting the racist educational systems in Canada is more than just a struggle, it's more than a struggle for simplistic notions of good grades and academic success. It's a necessary struggle for human rights, educational responsibility, and general success in life. In addition to being a human right, formal education is considered a crucial tool for advancement. So the point is, no matter where we stand regarding this issue, high school students are pushing back against systems, and it's important to document some of these critical practices and messages they are sending across for equitable schools. The slides on the headlines on the next slides will confirm this. Before I progress, I'd like to say that I inserted pictures of Black students, of Black girls with different hairstyles, because as I interviewed the girls, a lot of them talked about their hair and how their hair is viewed as exotic and how sometimes people make comments or touch their hair without their permission. So this is just an acknowledgement of that and a tribute to all the participants who took part in the study. So the headlines, the credit goes to CBC News. In November 2020, one of the headlines was, "We need a radical change. Toronto area students stage walkout to protest racism." Again, November 19th, 2020, CBC News. York Region Catholic students walk out of classes to protest racism. And then in Calgary, October 8th, 2020, this is again CBC News. Hundreds of Calgary students join anti-racism walkout at Bishop McNally High School. So it's happening and we need to talk about it. So what informs my study? Now, in terms of my social location, I come to this discussion as an African Canadian, a Ghanaian to be precise. I came to Canada several years ago as a highly skilled immigrant. Before then, I had come as an international student in the early 90s. And I went back to Ghana, worked for a number of years, and returned as a highly skilled immigrant. I can only speak from my experiences and observations as an immigrant. In Ghana, we have our own challenges, but that's not the focus of today's conversation. So there are several reasons for my interest in this topic, and I'll share 4 of them with you. I trained in Ghana as a lawyer with an interest in social justice. I worked and volunteered as an advocate and ally for people living with HIV/AIDS in Ghana and in Canada. I believe in advocating for resources and access to services for marginalized people. Because I'm a Ghanaian Canadian, I straddle 2 knowledge systems. It's a struggle sometimes when they conflict, and I'll elaborate on this as I go on. I'm also a mother. I arrived in Canada with 2 daughters, aged 6 and 8. They went through elementary, high school, and university. During this period, we shared several conversations with our friends, Black parents, and the friends of my daughters. The conversations were about teacher expectations, stereotypes, race and gender-based discrimination. And we also talked about assumptions made by teachers about them, particularly about their intellect and discipline. I noticed that regardless of these challenges, some of the girls pushed ahead by organizing activities or joining clubs to advocate for change. I decided the stories had to be told for the benefit of future generations. I'm passionate about resistance struggles, particularly for Black youth. Now, race. Race is a social construct, and Goldberg notes that race has established who can be imported, who exported, who are immigrants, who are indigenous, who may be property, who citizens, and among the latter, who get to vote, who do not, who are protected by the law, who are its subjects, who are employable, and who are not, who have access and privilege, and who are to be marginalized. Now, growing up, I was blissfully unaware of my assigned place as a Black person in the world. My earliest recollection of my interaction with race at a superficial level was with my white doll. When I was about 5 or 6, my parents gave me a white doll as a gift. To me, the doll just signified the idea that there were different people in the world. Color and hair texture were different. At university in 3rd year, I met my roommate, a white American, and that was the first time I interacted closely with a Caucasian person. Our interactions and conversations gave me additional insights into the world and my assigned position. Eventually, it became clear to me that I am indeed considered inferior in some parts of the world. This idea conflicts with what I believe about myself and people like me. Through education and experience, I'm privy to ongoing conversations of Blackness in all its complexity, diversity, and intersectionality. That's another quote from Dr. George Day. His research is foundational to my work. So now, race is a significant part of my academic work, and I contribute counter studies to the deficit-focused narratives about Black people. Of course, race has an inseparable relationship with all forms of oppression because power relations and privileges are embedded in these identities. Before I proceed, and I'm also informed by critical theory. I like community, and I'm also interested in the politics of research. So before I proceed, I'll just like to go through some of the definitions that came up in the study. So student resistance is students' responses to the dehumanizing and restrictive aspects of schooling that diminishes creativity. And transformational student resistance, this is the definition I adopted for my study, is that situations where students reflect on their school-related lived experiences and work to dismantle oppressive social structures. Activism, defined as work done by public citizens to resist the discriminatory and marginalizing effects of dominant power structures and institutions in order to work towards institutional, social, and societal improvement. It also includes pro-social behavior, advocacy, and organizing. Now, this study focuses on advocacy and organizing. Blackness is defined as an umbrella category that subsumes under it ever-shifting, ever-changing, organic, multicultural, and multilingual complexities. Blackness is complex. Black girls generally refer to a wide, diverse group of people of African descent. For the purposes of this study, I interviewed first and second generation Black girls whose parents and guardians are African immigrants who have lived in Canada for under 30 years. Some researchers refer to Black people in Canada as African Canadian. These are definitions, but I'll come back to them if I'll read one more. Resistive behaviors usually refer to beliefs and behaviors that protect marginalized people from the social assaults they encounter in dominant society. Now to some background information. This study builds on the solid foundation laid by researchers in education and related fields. They've researched extensively about the schooling experiences of Black youth and also about the activist lives of Black teachers, parents, and community agencies. Now, because we are studying student resistance, or because we are talking about student resistance, it's important for me to ask, Why is there a need for resistance or activism as far as education is concerned? When I was looking at the literature, I realized that sometimes resistance and activism or refer to the same thing. So for the purposes of this study, resistance and activism are the same. And of course, the definition of activism, as I saw in the literature, ranges from a common prayer to some radical actions. So I'll just limit it to advocacy and organizing for now. The challenges of Black youth in education, Black youth in Canada have been long-standing in terms of education. Research over the years has consistently pointed to a link between the racial identity of Black students and their academic achievement. This is due to the racialized nature of their interactions at school. Researchers and others have over the years expressed their frustration at the failure of the public education system to curtail challenges. For example, in 1992, the Stephen Lewis report noted that it is Black youth that are unemployed in excessive numbers. It is Black students who are being inappropriately streamed in schools. It is Black kids who are disproportionately dropping out. In 2008, they referred to it as an appalling situation, talking about Black students in Canada. 2016, Efua Cooper called the state of Black education in Canada a national disgrace. 2017, Maynard described Black schools as underserving of young Black minds and functioning as one arm of the carceral system that grips entire segments of the Black community. Progress has been slow, and Black disengagement is still a major challenge for community members. Several studies point to the connection between educational outcomes for Black youth and racism. In the words of Maynard, the state of Black education in Canada is also partly attributable to the indelible legacy of racism in the publicly funded Canadian education institutions. This legacy of racism is bequeathed by slavery, which has ensured the continued devaluation of the bodies, experiences, cultures, and histories of Black students in public elementary and high schools in Ontario. I need to mention that I'm not an educator. I'm not an expert in education in this country. I come at this as a concerned parent and as a PhD student. Historically, mainstream public high schools in Canada have not responded adequately to the needs of its diverse non-white population. I could go on and on and on and on, and I'm sure most of the people on this platform are familiar with some of the challenges. And so despite in spite of all that I have said, in 2022, we are still discussing the following: the differential treatment of Black students by teachers, the fact that by teachers, administrators, and sometimes their peers, assumptions about the capabilities of Black students' motivations and their integrity. These assumptions play out in their interactions with the teachers. They are streamed, discouraged from attending university. There's a high tolerance of racist incidents in the school. Teachers and staff are said to be active. Some teachers and staff are said to be active participants in racial microaggressions. There's harsher discipline for Black students, and there's a gap between their laws, their policies, but it looks as if there's a gap between there's no political will, or there's no will to implement these things. And so often, sorry, I missed. Okay. So often, school failure, sorry about that. School failure by Black students is psychologized. Black children do not like education. Parents, that is what is said. Parents are blamed and societal structures are protected. It's in view of all I have said regarding some of the negative schooling experiences of Black children and youth that segments of the Black population continue to interrogate and resist aspects of public high schools in Canada. I spoke briefly about Black youth and their experiences at school. I want to highlight briefly the situation with Black girls. So this quote is from Carter Andrews. It's imperative to recognize that when subjected to the white gaze, Black girls are adultified in ways similar to and nuanced from Black males. They are seen as dangerous, sassy, threatening, overly independent, and needing less nurture, protection, and comfort. Differential treatment, they experience differential treatment at school, just like Black boys or black males, but it also extends to gender. The stereotypes exclude them from normalized constructions of femininity and feed into interactions at school. Their behaviors are problematized because of existing racist perceptions, and the literature on Black girls mostly underscore the eraser of childhood. If the experiences of Black girls are not captured in scholarship, then strategies and frameworks proposed to address issues students face in schools do not accommodate the needs of Black girls. This is by Macpherson, a Canadian researcher. So based on all this, it's evident that it's important to document the critical practices of Black girls as they resist what they experience as oppression while navigating the school system. Why African girls? When I was looking at the literature, I noticed that there's a lot as much as there's relatively little written about Black girls in general, I did not see or hear in quotes the voices of, because Black is an umbrella, and under that are many groups of people with different histories and different experiences. And so I remember when I said I was going to interview African girls, somebody asked whether I was dividing the group. No, I'm not dividing the group. Africans are diverse, and there's unity in that. And when we come together, we are strong. So it's not about dividing the groups, but I realized that even with Black girls, I came across studies that talked about the experiences of Caribbean girls. I came across studies that talked about Black women. I came across the experiences that talked about African males, African boys, but I did not see studies about African girls. So I decided to include their voices. And as I have said to some people, the experiences may be the same because after all, we are all Black, but the experiences may also be different because we are from Africa, and we recently came from the continent, and different African countries have different experiences, and that may reflect in the study. Okay, so student resistance. So in order to work towards a schooling community that is not oppressive and limiting, Black youth in Canada continue to resist their denigration at school in several ways, by applying survival tactics and finding ways to navigate exceedingly complex situations. There have been several studies about minority student resistance. These studies talk about definitions, the motivations, the types of resistive actions, and outcomes of such actions. There's limited information on the social justice dimensions of African youth, particularly females and particularly girls, and resistance and transformational student resistance. Oppositional actions are often situated in deficit frameworks, and resistance is largely perceived as deviance. The inclusion of Black leadership narratives will improve schools for Black children. Okay, so to a large extent, resistance by Black students is largely perceived as deviance. They are described as disruptive kids. And as I said earlier, the existing literature talks about different types. So some of the types I came across are described as self-defeatist. Some of them are said to be in conformity, some are reactionary, and then others are transformational student resistance. Now, there are studies on transformational student resistance, and I found that most of the studies also focus on the personal transformation journeys of Black students. The biggest debate was what to do with student resistance. Should we engage the students? Should we squelch the resistance? And then there were also discussions about what fuels student resistance. While the challenges associated with Black education are well known in Canada, their transformational resistance struggles have been understudied. So increasingly, transformational student resistance has been highlighted as an avenue for improving both student outcomes and school restructuring. It's therefore important to emphasize the nexus between student resistance and school reform or school overhaul. This study expands the literature on how youth understand, articulate, and respond to their marginalization and how they produce change. Okay. So the definition that informs my study is Petroni's definition of transformational student resistance, which is situations where students reflect on their school-related lived experiences and work to dismantle oppressive social structures. As I looked through the literature, I also came across certain words that pointed to transformational student resistance. So I came across changing situations. I came across strategic. The fact that that kind of resistance is conscious of individual and collective power for change. And then the goal is to achieve a common good. The discourse is emancipatory. And there's also the goal of transforming personal, community, and educational situations by exercising their agency. According to Toshalis, student resistance offers the possibility of transformation in their relationship with us, that is in the relationship of students with teachers, transformation in their relationship with what we teach, transformation in their relationship to the school, and transformation in the school's relationship to larger societal trends. Student resistance makes things happen. So this quote by Toshalis underscores the importance of transformational student resistance and its ability to create or contribute to creating change. And it's in view of that okay. So in view of all I have said, the preceding, here are the gaps. Student resistance is complex, and there's a lot more to study about it because it's very difficult to determine why a student is resisting, for example. There's also a lack of information about African girls. I'll call them that for now. And then it's also important to contribute to efforts to shift from deficit frameworks to ones that privilege agency. And of course, the social justice aspects of Black student resistance is understudied. So there's a need for more studies. So Maynard has said that there are extraordinary histories of resilience, many documented and still more unwritten. And she also said that the stories of resistance are a testament to a politics of sustained Black cultural, intellectual, and spiritual creative practices. I love this quote from Abdi and Ibrahim. And the quote is that African Canadians are creating alternative spaces, hopeful and visionary spaces where we are not captives of our painful history, but active, creative, historical agents who are already using the past as a compass that guides us to the promised land, and our bodies as canvases to draw a new, desired, hopeful, and beautiful future. So there are several positive stories to tell. And these stories are told by Black girls. I'll share briefly, I'll give you an overview of what I looked at, the literatures and the concepts and some of the concepts and theories I looked at. So I looked at Black history, colonization, impact on society, and the importance of accurate analysis. I looked at education, and as part of education, I looked at social reproduction and resistance theories. And then I looked at student resistance as a body of literature. Then I looked at critical race theory and, of course, anti-Black racism. So why did I choose critical race theory? I came across studies that had been done with other frameworks, but I felt I wanted to start with I wanted to focus on critical race theory. It's officially been around since the 70s. And it came about as a result of the inadequacies of critical legal theory. Now, when I started my study, critical race theory was not so popular as it is these days. I see it as a good framework to discuss race. It facilitates discussions about race and other difficult topics in society, because it's evident that we have to talk about race, but there's also some hesitancy associated with the desire to talk about race. And it's only when we analyze these things that we will come up with solutions. Critical race theory also legitimizes, it centers the voices, perspectives, and experiences of Black girls as knowers. It can focus on the strengths of Black girls, and the narratives produced during the study counter myths and assumptions about Black girls. Intersectionality. I selected critical race theory because it enables me to also focus on the differences within communities in terms of oppressions, multiple oppressions. And critical race theory also allows me to focus on interactions in society and power, privilege, and whiteness, to have discussions about these concepts. It focuses on pedagogy, curriculum, and research agenda to account for the role of race and racism in education. It's a framework that has been used to theorize education for so many years. And it also highlights the idea that laws and policies are not colorblind, as in resistance to seeing racism. It has an activist dimension, and history is very important to critical race theory. There's no single definition, but these are some of the tenets of critical race theory. Latson-Billings asserts that applying a critical race perspective to situations at school is akin to applying a new prism that may provide a different vision to our notions of school failure for diverse students. And of course, researchers are cautioned against the uncritical use of narratives. Some have highlighted the limitations of critical race theory. The idea that it turns Black people into victims, the idea that it is not objective enough. But I find that, or I think that it's a framework. It has its use. It helps us to think about race rather than saying that we don't want to talk about race when race is clearly an issue, and when race is clearly an issue where Black students are concerned, because the evidence points to the fact that Black students are treated a certain way because of their race. I believe it's imperative to talk about race, to discuss it in a dispassionate manner so we find solutions. The emphasis is on solutions. And of course, now narrowing in on anti-Black racism. So that's also something I'm focused on. Anti-Black racism, a type of racism that is directed against Black people, Kumsa and others have an excellent article on anti-Black racism, and if you come across it, please take a look at it. It talks about anti-Black racism, a type of racism that Black peoples perpetuate as an internalized racism. And Black people are bombarded daily with their oppressors' negative images of themselves, and they internalize these images and start understanding them as their own images, consequence of self-deprecation, self-hatred, and self-loathing. I'll move to the other slide. So based on all I have recounted about the schooling experiences of Black students, particularly Black girls, and the absence of narratives by Black girls, I developed this study to create a space for them to share their experiences of organizing and advocacy in high school. Let me provide some details about the study. So the research question is, in what ways do the organizing and advocacy related activities of African girls or African Canadian girls? I've already defined what I mean by this. So I'll read it again. In what ways do the organizing and advocacy related activities of African girls align with student resistance theories? Related sub-questions are, how can advocacy and organization-related insights from study participants be used to engage school policymakers in anti-racist practice? And of course, as the girls are aiming to transform society, transformation also goes on within. And so the other question is, what kind of transformative experiences occur in these activities? Details about the study. To qualify, participants must have a demonstrated history of advocacy or organizing at school. I looked at Southwest schools in Southwestern Ontario. I interviewed people from Peel region, Peel, Durham, Kitchener-Waterloo, and York regions, and people came from Toronto. I had participants from Toronto and Guelph. Participants attended suburban and urban schools. Some of the schools were predominantly white and others were racially diverse. I interviewed first and second generation Black girls with parents or guardians as African immigrants who migrated from the continent of Africa within the last 30 years. 7 countries were represented. I really wanted to present as many countries as possible, but that wasn't possible. It just wasn't possible. And I'm from Ghana, and I didn't want all the girls to be from Ghana. I didn't want all the girls to be from West Africa. So I looked outside and I got 7 countries. And I think the pandemic also impacted the participants, the type of participants I got. So the ages are between 16 to 24, and the participants are high school, current high school, or past high school students. And the interviews were conducted online. Research design, it's a qualitative study, narrative inquiry, 20 semi-structured interviews. I used an interview guide. The questions were open-ended, flexible, allowing participants to construct meanings from their experience in order to provide rich in-depth data. I also conducted 2 focus groups. The focus groups were informal to allow participants to interact with each other and to share ideas. I used purposive sampling and snowball technique. Community involvement. The African community is really relational. And ideally, what I wanted to do was to interact with participants and the community at large in person. Initially, this was a participatory action research project, but the pandemic impacted that again. And so I had to shift that. So I did a lot of my contacts were online. I contacted African community associations targeted to youth. I also interacted with leaders of community associations. I had a research assistant of a certain demographic, and she worked hard to connect me with some participants. And of course, the pandemic had an impact on the participants. Now, in terms of ethical protocols, the study is approved by the Research and Ethics Board of Wilfrid Laurier University. The study, I had to be transparent with participants. I had to outline the study's purpose, the procedures, the risk, the fact that it's voluntary participation and that they could withdraw from the study anytime. I also ensured that they had informed consent. They knew all about the study. There were no surprises, and they had the option of withdrawing at any point without consequences. I had to be reflexive of the process. I had to ensure that I was constantly talking to myself and just to make sure that the process was going well. I was aware of power. I had to be aware of power imbalances because I was talking to African girls, and in our community, we really respect elders. And so I had to make sure that they were not seeing me as a mother or an auntie, as we refer to all older women, So I really had to manage it and build rapport so the participants could talk to me. I assured them of confidentiality and anonymity as required by the university. Now, in terms of the findings, as I indicated earlier on, my research is evolving and I'm now cleaning up the data. I would like the data to speak for itself. So I'm not going to guess. And so I will skip this section. What I can say is from a casual reading of some of the transcripts I cleaned, I saw in the answers of the girls that very often they think about resisting or they think about pushing back when they think they are being discriminated against, and then they keep quiet because of the consequences. So one thing I'd like you all to think about is how will the findings based on the voices, experiences, ideas of girls most likely to be perceived as angry and Black be received? When Black people push back or resist, it's interpreted in all forms and it's seen as disruption, it's seen as disruptive. So will this message even be well received? That's something to think about. Implications. Well, I believe that this is an important and timely study that will have that could have implications for policy. However, as a researcher, I'm aware of its limitations. For example, this study is based on a small sample of 20 participants. That does not reflect all the various African countries. Therefore, there's the need for further studies that would include more groups from the Black community. Expanding the study to include other young Africans and other Black groups in other parts of Canada would provide more valid conclusions, which could be more beneficial to policymakers, school guidance counselors, educational researchers across Canada and beyond in developing policies, programs, and activities. I'd like to end with this statement. Toshalis says that resistance is communication. It's a message that something isn't right. An educator needs preparation, courage, and practice to hear that message and channel it to something productive. Doing so changes students, our relationships with them, the context of that relationship, and us. And it's important for us to listen to students who resist. Of course, it's very difficult to figure out the motives because, I mean, sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between a student who is just goofing and a student who is actually resistant. And that calls for more research and consistency, and even spending time with participants to see, maybe an ethnography, to see, to actually get into their lives and their stories and to figure out what is going on. So I'd like to say that this study is only the first step to other things in the future. Thank you so much for your time again. Thank you for spending an hour of your evening with me. Thank you. These are the references, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Esther. It was illuminating, and you've just helped me scratch the surface to some new thoughts, and I'm looking forward to where your research goes. If anybody has any questions, please, there's an Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your screen. We'd be more than happy to have Esther tackle them this evening. My name is Maria Patrico, and I am from the Milton Public Library. Esther, as you were talking, it made me think about how in the US, there's a lot of laws that have been passing in schools banning the teaching of critical race theory. And I know your research is in Canada, but do you see any type of resistance there with issues in teaching critical race theory and racism in general in Canada, in the education system here?
Well, I would say that would like to think that racism is not an issue in Canada, but racism is an issue in Canada. And when I was doing the research, I came across studies that mentioned that critical race theory is applicable to Canada and it's relevant to Canada. Before the sentiments about the negative sentiments about critical race theory were expressed in the US, critical race theory as a theoretical framework was studied in universities. And as I said before, when I selected this framework for my study, it was normal, and I didn't have any problems. In fact, I was alarmed when my framework suddenly became an issue. I was alarmed, but I find that sentiments from the US sometimes blow over in Canada, so anything can happen. But as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a framework, and I think that there's even some resistance to this framework in Canada. But I see it as a framework that helps us analyze race in education, and it's important. So I'm hoping that there will. It looks like I've been kicked out.
No, we see you.
Oh, okay.
I see you.
Sorry,
maybe you moved
I must have touched something. Yes, so I'm hoping that it won't be banned in Canada. Yeah. It's a framework.
As I asked you that question, Zoe asked a very similar one. So thank you, Zoe. We were thinking the exact same thought there. Carolyn is asking, do you think school boards would be open to receiving your research? How do you begin that conversation with school boards?
Receive my research. Well, I believe, okay, first of all, I start by saying change is gradually and slowly coming. And I say that slowly just to show how slowly change is coming. But I think that school boards would be receptive, should be receptive, because these are insights from school girls or students. And it's important to also listen to the students as part of the group, or for want of a better word, as stakeholders, because these are their experiences. And if we must walk the talk, if we say we are interested in the welfare and well-being of all students, regardless of race and all the other forms of oppression, we should be interested. So I'm hoping school boards would be interested. There are Black teachers and Black parents and other allies of this cause who are in places, and I'm hoping that they would be, if they want to walk the talk, they would accept the findings of the study. And the findings are not new. The findings are not new. These are things we've been saying over and over and over and over and over for decades. So it's nothing new. And as I mentioned earlier on, political will is important. We know the truth. We just have to work hard at it to effect change, because we can't continue talking about the same thing over and over and over again.
Absolutely. And Carolyn said, "Hear, hear." Excellent response. So we have one more question from Samira. If anyone does have a burning question, we still have a bit more time, so please add it to the list here. Samira is asking, how did you narrow down your research topic? Did you interview the study participants more than once?
How did I narrow down the research topic? That's an interesting question. When I was in first year, everything was just blurry for me. I knew that I was interested at the time. I have an interest in student resistance. I have an interest in studying resistance, but I was not sure what I wanted to. I wasn't sure which angle I wanted to tackle it from. And so, of course, with the support of my advisors and my committee members, and then I had to, what really helped was when I did an extensive literature review for my comprehensive exam. That helped me to figure out what had already been studied and what needed to be studied. And so once I came out of after the comprehensive exam, I had a list, and when I looked at it, I noticed that the voices of African girls were silent in existing research. And I also noticed that transformational student resistance was an unexplored area. So I decided to focus on that. I think I've answered the question. So it took me a long, I navigated several roads and several challenges, and eventually I got here. But it's also, research evolves. So I'll see what happens when I get to the end. Once I've finished transcribing and coding and analyzing the data, I will see where the data takes me. I think the other part of the question is, did I interview the girls more than once? There's So as I was, I informed participants that I may come back to them to cross-check certain things and to clarify some points, some parts that are not clear to me. So that's an option. I haven't gone back to them yet because it's early. I'm still cleaning up my transcripts, but I will definitely go back to them.
Yeah, I love that about research. It really kind of tells you what it's going to be in the end. So we have another question here from Zoe. Where will your final work be published so that we can obtain and access it?
Where will my final work be published? Well, the university will have it, and I'm also hoping to turn some of the ideas into publications, and hopefully they'll be available. And then I have in mind a project with the participants. So I'm hopeful that eventually there will be some publications out there somewhere. At this point, I'm unable to give a specific answer, but there definitely will be publications.
Thank you. Is there maybe somewhere on social media people can follow you and your research, or maybe sometime in the future we'll be able to connect again and give everyone an update?
I'm a newbie to technology. I'm getting there. So maybe in future, I will have an Instagram account, and I will, yes. But for now, I just have an email address.
That's wonderful. Esther, those are all the questions we've had. So we would like to say on behalf of Wilfrid Laurier University and the Milton Public Library, thank you so much for your sharing your knowledge and your research and your expertise this evening. And thank you also to everyone that attended this evening. A copy of tonight's lecture will be shared on the Milton Public Library website in the next few days, as well as on YouTube. And we'll also be sharing links from tonight in an email to those who have registered for the Laurier Milton Lecture Series newsletter. And if you haven't registered, please visit beinspired.ca. Our next lecture will be on March 9th, and the topic will be From Stigmatized Stoners to Enlightened Explorers, How Product Design is Revolutionizing the Cannabis Market. And it will be presented by Dr. Sarah J.S. Wilner. Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. Thank you, Esther, and you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.